When archaeologists dug up Viking bones in Greenland, they expected farm tools and fishing hooks. Instead, they found human bones, split open for marrow, skulls cracked like coconuts, and burn marks from cooking fires. Were the legendary Norse settlers of Greenland reduced to eating each other just to survive? When archaeologists dug into the frozen soil of Greenland, they thought they were piecing together the story of hardy Viking farmers, men and women who braved the ice and snow to carve out a colony at the edge of the world. But what they actually uncovered was far darker. Scattered bones told a tale that no saga ever dared to write down. Human remains split open to suck out marrow, skulls cracked like coconuts, burn marks where flesh had been roasted. These weren't Viking feasts of meat and boar. These were signs of desperate survival, possibly cannibalism. The Norse who sailed west were supposed to be fierce explorers, warriors, and farmers. Yet their Greenland colonies vanished without a trace after 500 years, leaving only mystery behind. What went so wrong in this frozen frontier that the proud seafarers of the North may have turned on each other for their last meals? In this video, we'll dig into the chilling evidence, the harsh climate, the broken bones, and the disturbing question of whether Viking survival came at the ultimate human cost. This is the story of the cannibal colonies of Greenland. To understand why anyone would even consider gnawing on a neighbor's femur, we need to rewind. Long before Greenland became a frozen nightmare for the Norse, it was painted in the sagas as a land of opportunity. Around the late 10th century, a fiery red-haired outlaw named Eric the Red was banished from Iceland for murder. Instead of serving his time quietly, he set sail westward, exploring icy coastlines and fjords. What he found was a massive, inhospitable island covered mostly in ice, yet with a few southern fjords where grass grew and cattle could graze in summer. Eric saw possibility, and here's where the story gets nutty. Eric named it Greenland. Why? Probably as medieval marketing. He wanted settlers to follow him, and Greenland sounded a lot nicer than snowy rock full of ice and death. His gamble worked. Around 985 AD, hundreds of Norse families packed up their longships and sailed with Eric to this new frontier. At first, life wasn't too bad. The Vikings established two main colonies, the Eastern Settlement and the Western Settlement. They built turf houses, raised cattle, sheep, and goats, hunted seals, and traded with Europe for iron, wood, and luxury goods. At its height, the population may have reached 3,000 to 5,000 people, but Greenland was never an easy home. The growing season was short, winters brutal. The settlers depended on fragile trade networks, and when ships didn't arrive, things got grim, and then came the climate shift. Around 1300 AD, the Little Ice Age began. Temperatures plummeted, sea ice expanded, and the land that had once barely sustained crops now turned into a frozen desert. Livestock starved, hay ran short, and fishing became nearly impossible. Even seals, once plentiful, grew harder to find as ice-blocked hunting grounds. Imagine being a Greenland Viking in this era. You're snowed in, your cattle are dying, your children are hungry, and the nearest help is an ocean away. Worse still, the church demanded tithes and ambitious chiefs hoarded wealth. Survival wasn't just difficult, it was a daily gamble. By the 1400s, the Greenland colonies collapsed completely. But how? Did they simply sail back to Iceland? Were they absorbed by Inuit communities? Or, as some chilling evidence suggests, did starvation drive them to turn on each other in one of the darkest chapters of Viking history? That's where the bones come in. Silent witnesses to a horrifying possibility. For centuries, the disappearance of Greenland's Viking colonies was one of history's coldest mysteries. The sagas went silent, no records explained their fate, and for a long time, people simply assumed they either sailed away or starved quietly. But then archaeologists started digging, and the soil began whispering a darker story. In the 1920s and 1930s, excavations at old Norse settlement sites uncovered skeletal remains. At first, nothing unusual. Bones of cattle, sheep, and goats, along with fragments of seals and fish. These made sense. After all, this was Viking Diet 101. But as researchers sifted deeper, they stumbled upon bones that sent shivers down their spines, human bones mixed in with the animal remains, and these bones weren't intact. They had been split open lengthwise, cracked at the joints, and charred by fire. To any archaeologist, that's a clear sign of marrow extraction, the same treatment you'd expect from a butcher preparing soup bones. Some skulls were smashed open, likely to scoop out the nutrient-rich brains. In other words, these weren't burials. They looked like leftovers. Now, here's where it gets disturbing. Marrow extraction isn't casual. It's something people do when they're starving, because marrow holds essential fats and calories when everything else is gone. Think about it. A Viking family gathered around a fire, not roasting seal meat, but boiling their neighbor's femur for broth. That's not feasting, that's survival cannibalism. But skeptics argued, couldn't scavenging animals or natural processes explain the broken bones? Maybe frost cracked them. Maybe rodents gnawed on them. Archaeologists tested this. Natural damage looks very different from cut marks made by iron tools. On several bones, they found clean slicing marks, the unmistakable handiwork of human knives. One chilling discovery came from the site of Herjolfsnes, one of the Greenland settlements. Alongside animal bones, researchers found human remains with signs of deliberate cutting and burning. Forensic analysis suggested these weren't ritual burials. They were discarded like food waste, and it wasn't just one skeleton. Multiple sets of bones across different sites showed similar patterns, hinting that cannibalism wasn't a one-off accident. It may have happened repeatedly during times of starvation, especially in the colony's final years. Picture this. The long winters dragging on, livestock dead, no ships arriving, no trade, no rescue. In desperation, people would first slaughter their animals. Then maybe their dogs. Then, when all else failed, they looked to the only meat left, the dead. Or worse, the living. Now, does this prove Vikings in Greenland became cannibals? Not 100%, but the evidence is stacked against them. Bones don't lie. They carry the scars of knives, fires, and hunger. And in Greenland's frozen wasteland, those scars tell a horrifying story. But here's the nutty twist. The Vikings weren't the only ones in Greenland at the time. While the Norse were freezing and starving, another group of people thrived, the Inuit. Which raises the question, why did one culture adapt while the other collapsed into starvation and possible cannibalism? Here's where the story gets truly bizarre. While the Vikings of Greenland were collapsing into starvation, possibly boiling bones for marrow and cracking skulls for brain stew, their neighbors, the Inuit, were thriving in the same brutal environment. So why did one group adapt and survive while the other withered away? The Inuit, descendants of the Thule culture, began arriving in Greenland around the 1200s. Unlike the Norse, they were masters of the Arctic. They knew how to build igloos from snow, craft warm, waterproof clothing from seal and caribou skins, and navigate the ice with dog sleds and kayaks. They weren't trying to force European farming onto Greenland's soil. They lived with the land, not against it. The Inuit diet was rich in seal, walrus, and fish. They hunted whales and used every part of the animal for food, fuel, and tools. Unlike the Vikings, who clung stubbornly to cattle and sheep, the Inuit didn't need hayfields or European-style farms. When the Little Ice Age made farming nearly impossible, it hardly touched them. They were already adapted to the cold. Meanwhile, the Norse were stuck in what some historians call cultural blindness. They wanted to live like farmers in Norway, even though Greenland wasn't Norway. They built turf houses, raised livestock, and insisted on eating bread, dairy, and beef, even as their animals starved and the soil froze. They clung to their European identity, importing luxury goods like wine and church bells, while ignoring Inuit hunting techniques that could have saved their lives. And here's where it gets nutty. There's evidence the Vikings and Inuit did meet. Norse artifacts have been found in Inuit sites, and Inuit stories passed down through oral tradition describe encounters with tall, pale foreigners. Some tales portray the Norse as dangerous and violent. Others suggest trade and occasional cooperation. But overall, the Vikings never fully embraced Inuit methods. Imagine it. You're a Greenland Viking. Your cattle dead, your children starving, and right across the fjord is a thriving Inuit camp with seal blubber lamps burning, fresh fish cooking, and warm furs keeping them alive. Yet pride, stubbornness, and maybe even fear of going native stopped the Norse from copying the Inuit way of life. Some historians even suggest the church played a role. Christianity had taken firm root in Greenland, and priests may have discouraged adopting pagan Inuit customs. Eating raw seal meat or worshipping animal spirits would have been seen as ungodly. Instead, starving Norse farmers doubled down on prayer, tithes, and European farming until there was nothing left to eat but each other. It's a haunting irony. The Inuit thrived for centuries in Greenland, while the Norse vanished. The key difference wasn't strength or courage, it was flexibility. The Inuit bent with the ice. The Norse broke against it. But there's still one more dark layer to this story. Archaeological evidence suggests that starvation didn't just drive the Norse to cannibalism, it may have driven them into conflict with the Inuit. Here's where the mystery gets violent. For centuries, historians debated, did the Vikings and Inuit live side by side in fragile peace, or did hunger, fear, and desperation push them into brutal conflict? We know they met, that much is clear. Norse goods like iron knives, wooden carvings, and even fragments of chainmail have been discovered in Inuit settlements. These could have been acquired through trade, or scavenged from the ruins of Norse farms after bloodshed. Inuit oral histories describe encounters with pale-skinned foreigners. Some stories call them kavdlunite, strangers who came from across the sea. Sometimes these strangers traded wood, metal, and woven cloth. But other tales speak of ambushes, spear fights, and raiding. To the Inuit, the Norse may have been both neighbors and threats. Archaeological evidence adds fuel to this theory. In at least one site, Norse skeletons show signs of violent trauma, sword cuts to the skull, spear thrusts to the ribs. Were these victims of inter-Viking feuds or Inuit retaliation? No one can say for sure. But in a world where food was life and starvation loomed, peace may have been too much to hope for. Now imagine the scene. A starving Norse farmer, his livestock dead, trudges across the snow to beg or bargain with Inuit hunters. Desperation makes him reckless. Perhaps he tries to steal seal meat or demands aid that the Inuit cannot spare. Words turn to shouts, shouts to weapons, and suddenly the icy silence of Greenland is broken by the clash of iron against bone. Some historians suggest that cultural misunderstanding played a deadly role. To the Inuit, survival was communal. Food was shared and hunting was cooperative. To the Norse, honor and ownership were paramount. A simple disagreement over a dead seal could escalate into bloodshed. But here's the nuttiest twist. While Norse accounts of Greenland are nearly silent on the Inuit preserved centuries of memory about the Norse. Their stories outlasted the Viking colonies themselves. This suggests that the Inuit won the cultural battle, not just by surviving, but by remembering. The church may have also stoked division. Norse priests and settlers saw the Inuit as heathens. To accept Inuit ways might have felt like rejecting Christianity itself. Instead of cooperation, the Vikings clung to their European identity, even as famine hollowed them out. By the 1400s, the Inuit had fully occupied Greenland while the Norse colonies had withered away. Whether the end came through battles, disease, starvation, or slow assimilation is still debated. But one thing is certain, the Inuit survived and the Vikings did not. Think about that irony. The mighty Norse, who once terrorized Europe with dragon ships and axes, were defeated not by kings or armies, but by the frozen land, their own pride, and perhaps clashes with hunters who knew how to thrive where they could not. And yet, the mystery deepens. Because in the last days of the Greenland colonies, evidence suggests the Norse did something even darker than fighting the Inuit. They may have turned their swords not on outsiders, but on each other. If you thought Viking battles were brutal, wait until you hear about what archaeologists uncovered in the supposed sanctuaries of Greenland. Among the scattered ruins of Norse settlements, researchers have found bones, human bones, bearing marks that don't fit peaceful burials. Some skulls had been split open, long bones shattered lengthwise, marrow extracted. In some cases, scorch marks suggest the bones were placed over fire. These aren't random accidents. They look chillingly similar to the butchering of livestock. Now, was this ritual or survival? The evidence leans toward the latter. Imagine the scene. A bitter Greenland winter. Stores of grain long gone, cattle dead from cold. A family takes shelter inside the stone walls of a small church, a place once meant for prayer. Hunger gnaws so hard it twists the mind. One death, maybe from cold, maybe from starvation, is followed by something unthinkable. Desperate hands take knives meant for farming and carve flesh from the body. A grim feast begins beneath a wooden crucifix. Some scholars hesitate to call it cannibalism. They argue the marks could be caused by scavenging animals or even ancient burial practices. But the patterns of cuts, the precision, the marrow extraction, line up hauntingly well with known cases of survival cannibalism. Think Donner Party, think Jamestown. Desperation makes monsters of us all. What makes this even darker is the location of some bones. At least one site showed evidence of human remains discarded inside or near a church. Churches, in Norse culture, were sacred spaces, the last bastions of hope. The fact that starvation drove people to desecrate their own holy places with acts of cannibalism paints a horrifying picture of just how dire things had become. One unsettling theory suggests organized cannibalism, that in the final, starving years, the last colonists gathered together, pooling resources, including human bodies, to survive another day. A twisted version of communion, flesh consumed not as a symbol but as food. Of course, we may never know if this was widespread or a last isolated act of desperation. But the bones don't lie. Something unspeakable happened in Greenland's churches, something the sagas would never dare record. And think about this. When later European sailors returned to Greenland in the 1500s, they found only ruins. The churches still stood in eerie silence, their walls empty, their graveyards overgrown. No one could say exactly what had happened. Did the settlers starve? Did they die of disease? Or did they devour one another until no one was left to tell the tale? It's a chilling reminder that history often hides its darkest truths. Not in written words, but in broken bones, buried deep beneath the ice. But the tale doesn't end here. Because even after the last Viking was gone, their memory lingered. And the Inuit who inherited Greenland carried stories of strange foreigners, desperate acts, and perhaps the whispered legends of cannibals among them. By the early 1400s, the Norse colonies in Greenland were unraveling like frayed rope. Trade with Europe had slowed to a trickle. Once regular ships from Iceland and Norway no longer braved the dangerous ice-clogged seas. Without outside supplies, iron, timber, grain, the Vikings were trapped in a land that no longer wanted them. What's haunting is how the colonies disappeared so quietly. No epic battles, no dramatic saga of conquest. Just silence. One settlement after another faded, leaving behind stone ruins, empty turf houses, and abandoned churches. The western settlement was the first to fall, sometime around 1350. A visiting priest described it as deserted, the people gone without a trace. Had they all starved, migrated, or perished in one final act of desperation? We still don't know. The eastern settlement limped along for another century. Archaeological evidence suggests life became increasingly grim. Smaller houses, thinner livestock bones, signs of malnutrition in human remains. Some graves show stunted growth, tooth decay, and arthritis, clear markers of famine and hardship. The last written record we have comes from a wedding at Valsey Church in 1408. A joyous event with music and celebration. But after that, nothing. The chronicles go silent. The colony vanished into the snow. Historians have pieced together several theories: starvation and cannibalism. As we explored earlier, hunger may have driven the settlers to eat whatever and whoever they could, until no one survived. Inuit conflict or absorption. Archaeological finds suggest contact between Norse and Inuit peoples. Some argue the Norse were driven out, others that survivors were absorbed into Inuit communities. But the sagas are eerily quiet about this possibility. Migration back to Europe. A romantic theory says a few ships escaped, carrying survivors back to Iceland or Norway. But there's no record of their arrival. If anyone made it, they vanished into history. Plague. Some scholars suggest disease struck the already weakened population, wiping them out quickly. What makes the Greenland story so chilling is its finality. Entire communities, hundreds, maybe thousands of people simply gone. No letters home, no desperate chronicles, no saga songs of survival. Just abandoned farms, scattered bones, and whispers of cannibalism. And here's the nuttiest twist. When later sailors rediscovered the ruins, the Inuit who had lived in Greenland for centuries told stories of the pale foreigners who once dwelled there. They spoke of starving settlers, gaunt and desperate, who ate things no human should eat. Whether legend or truth, the echoes of cannibalism had seeped into cultural memory. The Vikings had once been conquerors of seas, feared raiders who terrorized Europe. Yet here, on the edge of the world, they weren't warriors. They were survivors, until survival itself demanded horrors too grim to sustain. Their disappearance is more than a mystery. It's a warning that even the fiercest societies can collapse when nature, hunger, and desperation align. And sometimes the last chapter of a civilization isn't written in ink, but in blood and bone. So what really happened in Greenland? Did the mighty Norse, once raiders, traders, and explorers, truly end their saga gnawing on each other's bones in frozen churches? The evidence suggests something grim. Starvation, desperation, and the collapse of a society pushed to the edge of survival. Whether through cannibalism, migration, or assimilation into Inuit life, one thing is certain: the Greenland Vikings vanished, leaving behind only ruins and unsettling questions. It's almost poetic in a chilling way. A people who once struck fear into Europe's heart met their end not on the battlefield, but in the silence of a frozen land. No armies, no epic saga songs, just hunger, cold, and the unthinkable choices of survival. And perhaps that's the most haunting lesson of all. Civilizations, no matter how fierce, can collapse quietly when nature proves stronger than culture, and desperation eats away not only at the body, but at the soul. The bones of Greenland whisper a warning across centuries. Hunger can turn conquerors into cannibals, and even the toughest societies can vanish without a trace. So next time you hear tales of Viking glory, remember this darker side of their history. Not every saga ends in triumph. Some end in silence. If you enjoyed this dive into the nutty, bizarre, and disturbing corners of history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Nutty History, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next strange tale from the past. Until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and beware the curses history leaves behind.